Hello,
Oh,
everyone. Welcome to this discussion with Mike Leber. I'm really excited to have him with us today in this discussion. Mike Leber is an executive consultant and business agility coach and a trainer. Hi, Mike. How are you?
hi, Nopur. Nice meeting you. It's awesome.
Same here, Mike. Mike, why don't you briefly introduce yourself to our audiences?
Yeah, sure. You did already the most important job. My titles, my roles. Um, we're always playing with these roles a little bit, but I'm attaching it to what I'm doing nowadays. I work with organizations, not only with teams alone, but actually leadership, whole systems. I think that is important. That's why the business agility comes in. I'm located here in Vienna, Austria, in the heart of Europe, if you like. Um, I used to travel a lot before the pandemic. I still do. That's why I think, meet here, because you're in India, I'm in Austria. That means I have a lot of clients here in the German-speaking region, but also do a lot of stuff across the globe.
Ah, that's amazing to know about you a little more, Mike. And Mike, to begin with this discussion, it's been said that agility requires core stability. So, what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The first question could be what agility actually means, right? And there is one sentence I think we always refer back to, which is, have more of a responsive or responding mindset than a reacting one, right? So it's not just being super busy and getting stuff done and moving stuff around, but it's actually also the thinking process behind. So responding to things, that's one thing. Now, obviously, this comes a lot with openness to change and adapt. And I think that's where your question pretty well goes along with. As long as we don't have any sort of stability, it is hard to respond, to be able to change things. And what would that be? It would really be to think about our customer base, our markets, our position in the market, our own identity, and what we deliver to the customer segments we defined. No stability would basically mean a lot of mess around the whole organization. And I think it's no news what the lean people already told us. You cannot improve a system as long as it is not stable. And stable would basically mean we don't put more stuff into the organization than finally we get out of it. So I think that's a pretty interesting question. We could talk a lot about it, but that is my short version of an answer.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And we are in a different world altogether nowadays, and companies are working tirelessly to manage the impact of COVID-19. Can you
Right.
please share three tips that you have for organizations to stay agile and sail through this entire situation?
Right. Yeah. Without being arrogant, because this situation is probably unprecedented. We talked a lot about such circumstances, but never experienced it before. And I think most organizations and most people have been into this the first time since last year. But part of my work where I see the actual substance is people. Not so much processes in the first place. We talked stability before. Where does stability come from? I believe it's how people finally show up and look at things. So stability, I believe, is within the people, is within the staff, it's within the organization. And so the very first thing I believe is that we need to look at people inside the organization. What that means is how do we approach each other, and what does leadership do in the face of this high uncertainty? And I would say, first tip here is to take your time as a leader, not only focus on getting stuff done, which is obviously a very urgent topic. Most leaders and executives would now look at the balance sheets and cash flow and see how long can we survive from a financial standpoint, and that might drive a lot of anxiety. but really, far-looking leaders, leaders who are really, you know, thinking about the future in still a positive way, would probably see, hey, we need to stabilize. That's what we just talked about. We need to approach the people. We need to drive fear out. So that's the first thing. Leaders getting out of the fear space and basically providing a container for people to, rest again, get back to their normal way of doing and collaborating. Second, it's probably highly important how do people then show up with each other. And I think now with all this remote work, one important piece is how do we check in regularly? So not to drive apart, how to can we align with each other on a regular basis? And third, um, it's probably most important than ever to focus. We're getting now, lost working alone and, having all this stuff at the table, and we're not sure where to start and what that finally means. That basically means, we just talked about it, we need probably shift a lot of our focus. We need to deprioritize things. We probably need to rethink a lot of things where we can actually create value in a totally different context. The context is different because a lot of industries are now forced to change. I mean, just think about the airline industry, think about all the manufacturing industries, but also service industries. If you think about parcel delivery, all this stuff. So nearly every product, every service out there needs to change. And that basically needs, to gain different focus points and probably deprioritize stuff which we had on our agenda before, and not just rethink, hey, how can we reinvent what we did so far into the direction where it creates more value in the next quarters, in the next few years, because we're probably not coming back to this normal as we were used to very soon. Maybe it's even not coming back at all. Maybe flying will not be as required anymore, and maybe services will be totally differently consumed. If you just think about the digital space, how now suddenly certain apps take off and and basically gain totally new customer bases.
Right. So it has changed the entire marketplace completely, which we were not, I think, prepared for. But now we have seen all of it, and we are much mature than previous year. So, Mike, when a major disruption happens, do you think team members working in remote locations can remain agile? Because that's the biggest challenge for teams this year.
Yeah. Well, I just mentioned, fear, and so it is very obvious that disruption of this kind, of this scale, drives anxiety. And anxiety drives this fight or flight mode. So the first thing we obviously need to consider, how can we get out of this? I already mentioned leaders who could help people, even remotely, to check in with them regularly and get back to a sort of future and forward thinking. So that's, I think, the first circumstance we need to look after. Second, what does agile mean, to be agile? I think that's another interesting one. Is it just to follow or pursue any of the procedures, the methods, the practices we had so far? Like, if, I don't know, I'm not mentioning a framework here, but we might have got used to, hey, we're running this in sort of, this type of planning, this type of, I don't know, whatever, feedback loop and stand-ups, and we used to use, I don't know, physical wall spaces for our, stuff to put on. But is that the core thing? I don't believe so. I believe when we talk about agile, or better, agility, and it's about people, right? Then the real substance, I believe, comes from relationship. So how are we in relationship as team members? And that is finally not, let's say, made impossible via an external, event like COVID or the pandemic in this case. But it probably needs, for many teams and team members, a sort of rethinking, maybe a reset, to look after the real thing. And that is my belief. If we talk about being agile, like tons of practices and maybe a couple of principles, my belief is if we look at the Agile Manifesto, you probably remember the sentence, everything comes from the first one, which is individuals and interactions. And as soon as we are able to check in into our relationships with other people, with other team members, with everyone across the organization, also remotely, then I believe we're going to, ramp up again our journey and basically are able to create and basically recreate where we were coming from.
Right, Mike, and you have mentioned an amazing and very true thing that let's look forward to the real things. And this whole situation, what I believe, has inspired us to look forward to what is the real thing, what brings real value for us, than focusing on so many things. So I think in this whole year, we started um, um, at a mature stage of looking at what is making sense to us and what should we really do. So it in that way turns out to be a bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mike, leadership obviously plays a very critical role when disruption happens or any sort of change is introduced into the system,
Right.
and the strategic alignment is very necessary at those times.
Mm.
So, according to you, how can strategic alignment can be achieved when teams are not co-located?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing lies again within the word strategic, right? There's a difference between strategy and strategic because strategic means we're look taking a few more steps back and we're trying to look at the bigger picture. We're not just reacting; we're really responding from a higher space. Strategies has been probably come under pressure for every organization last year. I cannot imagine that, let's say, apart from Amazon or similar companies, uh, that most companies could stick to their initial strategy. Everything probably had to be thrown away. And what that means is probably what you just mentioned. Leaders needed to rethink. So leadership teams probably became suddenly a topic. We see a lot of leaders, fulfilling their role of CEO, COO, CFO, and you name it, and they just work on their individual part for the organization. um, Very rarely they really, would, let's say, relate to a real team. So to be the, let's say, the role model of all other teams inside the organization. Now to basically realign the organization or, you know, find new grounds, that was probably the first ingredient every organization needed. Second, what they probably came up with then, so what the leadership team does now in a more decentral way, where we, have no opportunity as such to meet regularly, they obviously need to be more transparent. So they probably even need to communicate more. Hey, we're still there, right? That's the first message, or has been the first message probably March, April last year. But now, what are we thinking about? Where's our thinking heading towards? How would they integrate other people's views into the process instead of just saying, "Hey, sorry, we can't consider our organizations or staff's skills and opportunities at this point, so we need to drive it." So that is probably the second thing. And the third one, um, you know, getting people together regularly at a bigger scale, I think, in a very, let's say, structured way. Because onboarding thousands of people for virtual events is not a simple thing. It needs structure, it needs preparing. We've seen in many places came true over the past months. So companies who were mainly remote still gathered thousands of people, but had them prepare their own stances. So the magic sauce was actually to bring together. Okay, what is the leadership team thinking? What are we currently working on? What is every responsible person for a product line or you name it, currently planning, provide this information as transparent as possible, and then have a sort of virtual open space where just everybody can meet, and then activities can be broken down into the different projects. What is obviously then still important for staying aligned is basically the regular and frequent check-in. So, working remotely, how would I organize my day? And that's probably a big challenge, not only for leaders, it's for everyone. I mean, for everyone who is currently trying to pursue knowledge work, while in the background you've got your kids who are not able to go to school. I don't know, you have to take care for your house or whatever. It's suddenly all together. So how would you organize your day job, if you like, in a way better way, and at the same time make space time and connect with your peers on a regular basis. So I think the value of stand-ups, as we used to call it, and now don't need to stand up, but regular check-ins, let's say weekly, or let's say tools which now help obviously more electronically for with transparency, is probably the vital thing to finally stay aligned, or basically say, hey, are we actually after what we just kicked the year off with? Is it still working? What are we seeing on the market? I mean, that's so important, right? What are we currently sensing? What is happening with our customers, and how could we bring that back into conclusions and decision making in order to basically really grow this adaptive capability? So I think this whole situation of the past 12 months changed the whole game, what we talk about strategy and how we finally pursue strategy on all levels. And it's so exciting, actually, as much as challenging it is for everyone. Exciting to see what we all learn together out of it, and are finally able to cope with more of these challenging things ahead, right? There is tons of other things which might still bother us, like the ecological challenges with traveling, might not come back as we were used to, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that is my let's say opinion, observation, and finally also what we see currently happening in our client spaces and actually on the road.
Yeah, Mike. So since we're talking a lot about teams being co-located and
Right.
alignment, so what would be your key takeaways from 2020 in
Hmm.
order to build a virtual team culture?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting point because I mean, I would even boil it down to what I already said. Like, how are people in a real team in relation to each other? So how does this relationship actually nurture a team culture? I believe what we had before, what we were used to, and what was just common way of working, not necessarily paid a lot into teams. There might have been tons of people sitting in the same room, but as you know, they might have not shared the common vision. They might have not really been after their relationship. They might have just I'm on a team and I do my work, and I do all the procedures in order to move my work further or our work further. But it was maybe not this sort of team thing as we talk about it or think about it. So suddenly the virtual thing makes us more conscious about what team really means. And it also makes us aware of that only being remote alone, I mean, first of all, it works, right? What you just said, we were used to, hey, in person, it's the only thing. I don't think it's the only thing, but I go with Alistair Coburn's picture of communication bandwidth. So of course, the closer we are, the closer we can come with each other, the higher the bandwidth for communication. That is just a fact, a matter of fact. And I see a lot of people who get tired of the only, two-dimensional view on their team where everybody's a little or larger box, doesn't matter. So I think those teams who were already able to know each other uh, benefited a lot now in the virtual space, because I believe having had such a higher bandwidth once with other people nurtures the possibility to play with lower bandwidth more effectively. And while still companies were able, I think that's also a takeaway, to onboard lots of people in during the pandemic where nobody ever met personally. So that's a big achievement, right? Huge, big time for every company. So congratulations. These people will still probably miss to meet their colleagues at least once physically. And last, my last thinking here, and that is actually to break with our, initial thought, now teams have to be in the same room. And you mentioned culture. No, I believe it depends on the culture of the individual team, even not of the organization, but the individual team. What do they need and consider to be working for them? And I know many teams were obviously not so much coming from the corporate space, but more from the startup domain, where one person just said, we were super successful. Our startup keeps growing. And last year I spent in East Asia, team here in Vienna, and it was my most productive time on the team, because he could check in at every time what was working for him. He was able to align with his team. It fit to their culture. So remote work can really be a huge booster if people become aware of how they want to handle it. So that is basically the outlook for 21 and beyond, I believe. And I think we're still here to, face the challenge. The challenge is not gone, and again, there will be more to come, I believe. But I think we are now in the possibility to approach these challenges more consciously, and yeah, and prove on a day-to-day basis that, for example, what we see in social media sometimes, the weird debates, or in politics, that this is not mankind, but we can do better.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for sharing such wonderful insights with us in this interview. I really hope that our audiences will be able to approach the challenges more consciously, as you said, with the kind of wisdom
Yeah,
you shared with us. And we look forward to discuss more, learn more with you.
sure.
Thank you for sparing some time with us for this interview.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks very much. All the best.